This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
All right, it's another episode of Play-by-Playcast. Welcome back in, everybody. Thanks, as always, for the subscribe, the stream, the download, however you're listening to this podcast. If it's on iTunes, do take a chance to give us a rating or a review, throw some stars our way, and leave some comments if you'd like. We did get over 50 reviews last week. We didn't get, over 50 reviews in a week, but, we eclipsed 50 reviews for the podcast last week. So if you get a couple of seconds, we would much appreciate you letting us know how this thing is going, if you enjoy it, and what you enjoy about it. As the open said, my name is Joel Godet. This is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development pod that dives into the tips, tricks, experience, process, stories, and preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. Today, Paul Peck is our guest. He's the football voice of the Buffalo Bulls, but his story is a little bit more intricate and cool than just being the play-by-play voice of the Buffalo Bulls football team. The football team out of the Mid-American Conference, because he also had a long career in local TV news in Buffalo, and now is kind of on this new venture within the last year plus in terms of, year plus or 2 years, in terms of creating a space in new media and kind of finding a niche the way the sports media industry is going. And then, of course, Paul's a Syracuse guy and came up through the WAER student radio system, but he didn't do it at just any time. He did it in 1987 in particular, when he would have had a chance, and he did have a chance, to broadcast a Final Four, a national championship game, and one of the most iconic plays in, I'd say, college basketball history, but certainly Final Four and national championship game history as well. So we'll talk about that with Paul coming up here in just a second. Before we do that, though, I want to touch on where I'm at right now, and that is Madison, Wisconsin for the CrossFit Games. Came up here on Tuesday, I guess on Monday night, and then got underway with everything on Tuesday morning. My broadcasts officially kick off as you're listening to this on Friday morning today. On the air today, tomorrow, and Saturday with the teenage division, 16 and 17-year-olds, and then what's called the Masters division. So once you hit a certain age, 35 in CrossFit, you can start competing in age groups as opposed to just the open division, which would be your Rich Fronings, although he's a team guy now, but previously when he was really dominant. Your Matt Frazier's, your daughters, Katrin Davis' daughter, Katrin David's daughter, Annie Thoris' daughter, Sarah Sigmund's daughter, Tia Claire Toomey, of course, is the reigning champion. They all compete in that division. But I've got the teenagers, 16 and 17, and then the Masters between the ages of 35 and 49. And when it comes to this sport, there's some really big names in there as well. So I'm looking forward to getting out there and watching some people throw some weight around competitively. Should be a lot of fun. If you've never been to the CrossFit Games, it's an experience. It's like a weightlifting Woodstock, I guess would be the way to describe it. We're in Madison, Wisconsin. The Alliant Energy Center is the home arena. That's what they call the Coliseum, which is like your basketball, hockey arena that you go in. And there are events in there. There was a marathon row in there on Wednesday nights. But then there's also what's called the North Park, which is an outdoor stadium. And it's kind of like, they assembled it just for this. It's kind of like a pop-up soccer stadium that's outside. And then there's a pavilion where the age group competitions happen. And then there's an expo center where they have the vendor fair. And then there's, Rogue, the company that sells athletic gear and weightlifting gear and weights They've got their own venue, and Reebok has a massive tent that you can go to, and then there's a beer garden, and then there's an outdoor kind of like watch party space like you would see during the World Cup, where there's an outdoor screen, and you can all congregate. There's food trucks and things outside, and you can kind of just stand there and watch on the big screen what's going on everywhere if you can't get across the campus. There's an outdoor obstacle course. I mean, it's just wild how big the venue is, how many people are here, and the size and scope of the operation. And then from a broadcast standpoint, it's really cool. To broadcast the CrossFit Games, they broadcast, what we talked about earlier, the Open Division, and that's on Facebook Watch and YouTube and games.crossfit.com, but also on network television CBS. Sean Woodland is the play-by-play guy for that, and hopefully we'll get him on here on the podcast in a couple of weeks. But network television CBS and CBS Sports Network is airing shows about the CrossFit Games this weekend and has been phenomenal in its coverage of what's going on here. So that's that. But then there's also a team division. That is broadcast. The teenager division. That is broadcast. And the masters division from 35 to 39, from 40 to 44, from 45 to 49, from 50 to 54, from 55 to 59, and 60 plus. Each of those divisions. Those are broadcast. There is a compound at the CrossFit Games of nine television trucks. It is a full-out production. And what's cool is they all have the Monday Night Football wrapping on them. Not all of them. I think 3 or 4 of them have the Monday Night Football wrapping on them. I mean, like, you walk around, and I've never been to the Olympics, and I'm sure that is a much bigger production. Just obvious. I mean, that's a silly statement, but, like, obviously from the size and scope of what's going on. But it's like a mini Olympics. Like, you're walking around this broadcast compound with producers and audio engineers and graphic coordinators and directors from the highest levels that produce everything under the sun for everyone under the sun. And it's just massive. It's been awesome to be a part of, and I am fired up to finally get on the call this weekend for some teenage and masters action. Next week, I'll let you know how it goes. So we'll kind of have the post cap for you from there. But enough CrossFit for today. Let's talk to Paul Peck and about his rise in the play-by-play industry and all those things we touched on earlier, including Keith Smart. But we start with those Syracuse days. We start with getting into play-by-play and where the early stops in his career took Paul Peck before he became a household name in Western New York and Buffalo. Paul Peck here on PXPcast.
Bill Roth, the longtime voice of the Virginia Tech Hokies, was a sports director when I was a senior in '88. Mike Tirico was a year later. Charlie Polillo was a year later. Ian Eagle was 2 years later. But we were also, when I was a freshman in '83, '84, it was Sean McDonough and Greg Papa, and then a year later it was Dan Horde and Craig Minervini. So, like, I had this incredible overlap of household names for guys like us. And, I don't know that I ever met Greg Papa, and it was like, because, like, right when I got there was this very famous article in Sports Illustrated, which at the time was sort of the Bible of sports, that was a feature on the Syracuse sort of broadcasting connection, with Greg being the featured guy. So it was like this amazing, like, he was a god to all of us. I'm a freshman, and like Greg Papa was in Sports Illustrated, and Larry King was writing, like, when he wrote his column for the USA Today, it's like, if I was looking for a young broadcaster, I would go to Syracuse's WAER. And like, at the time, this was like, oh my God, but you were around this amazing collection of talent. And I think you, Joel, know this as well as anybody. It was all of us that drove each other to be better, because you're like, I want to be as good as Dan Horde. I want to be as good as Sean McDonough. I want to be as good as Jim Jackson. This is what I have to live up to. And then hopefully that carried through to the guys after, my class, who was like, I want to be as good as Bill Roth. Bill Roth is unbelievable. That's what I have to be as good at. And that's what I've always told people, what makes Syracuse a great place for broadcasters, the classes are great, the curriculum is great, the facilities are great, but it's the people and the drive. If you're going there, you are determined to be the next blank. Like, you don't go there if you're not driven to be that. So you have this incredible collection of very driven, talented people who all want to be great. And as long as that's not like ripping each other's lungs out, which I never felt that way. I hope you didn't. I never felt that way. Then you all look at each other and go, we can all be good. Let's make each other better.
You know, I mean this with no disrespect to any other era of the radio station, but I feel like the era you just described is like the golden age, too, of WAER, because you look at like an 8-year span, and it's like what you said. And I'm sure part of it is the age that it was, too. So most of those guys now are to the point in their careers where they are household names. But it's like the golden age of all these people. When you look at your McDonoughs, to your Eagles, to your Roths, to your Hordes, to your Caridis, etc., and I was talking about this with Horde on the podcast at this point, what would have been a couple episodes ago, about, like, did you know at the time that, like, this is who we all are and this is who we all could become? And that's a weird question to talk about yourself in that way, but, like, did you all kind of get the feeling that, like, this is something pretty cool we're sitting on?
Oh, I don't think any of us ever thought we were, you know, and part of what you're saying is right. And I don't, you know, there's been so many great guys that have come after those groups that I would never tell you that that generation was any better than anybody else. I think what you said has a lot to do with it. We know those guys. But let's be honest, they've reached the kind of level where they're all household names.
They just happen to be 40, so it's
that's part of it.
They've paid the right amount of dues.
I don't think anybody, I don't know what Horty would have said to you, but no, you know, our heroes were Costas and Kurt Gowdy and, you know, and the greats of the Jack Buck and the greats of the game. So, you know, none of us would ever have said we're going to be them or that good. But I think everybody had some confidence that they could be successful and make it a life and make it a career. You know, but to see a Greg Papa, I think he was doing, I'm trying to remember, Golden State Warriors, like right after he had graduated. You're like, oh my God, he's calling NBA games, you know. And then Sean McDonough was probably less than 5 years out of college before he's doing network and Red Sox games and stuff.
The World Series.
Yeah, so I mean, so those guys were anomalies a little bit, but that was, I always remember, and I hope it's still like this, and I think it is, where our sports office was in the old WAER Newhouse 2 was way back around the corner, but it was the pictures on the wall, and every day you walked in to look at Marv Albert and Dick Stockton and Bob Costas and all these other guys, and you sat and looked up as you were writing your sportscast as a freshman to look up at these pictures, and you're like, that's who I want to be, right? That's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. So that was where the inspiration came.
How good was McDonough? Like, did you? I know I just asked you this in general, but, like, did you know with him? Because I feel like a guy like that, or even Tirico, like, we've had Dave Ryan on the podcast, and he would say, like, you know, he'd walk by and professors would, like, genuflect.
Yes. We used to call him the mayor. Yeah. We used to call him, Todd Callis pinned that. Now we didn't mention Todd's name. Todd was in my class as well, too. Todd pinned him the mayor because we lived together and you couldn't walk from where we lived in Castle Court anywhere on campus without Mike knowing about 40% of the people that walked by him. So that's why he was shaking hands, he was stopping, you'd have to stand there, you'd have to wait for Mike to, come on Mike, we got to go, we got to get somewhere. So Todd dubbed them the mayor. So Sean was great. Sean was an interesting personality, much as he is now. Sean liked to have a lot of fun, but Sean could turn it on. And obviously you knew who Sean's father was, and you knew his background. And I think we all knew that, that he was really, really good. I think with Mike, everybody knew right away. From the minute he walked in the door, like, this guy is special. And I'll never forget, my dad's always been a pretty good judge of character, and my dad met Mike for the first time probably somewhere during Mike's freshman year on a parents' weekend or something, and my dad said, that guy's going to be a star. And my dad is by no means not a broadcaster. He's not an expert. He's just a pretty good read of people. And I remember vividly him telling me that guy's going to be a star. He knew, he saw something in Mike, and we all saw it too. And what's great about Mike was Mike may have known that, and Mike may have believed that in his own mind, but Mike never held that over your head, never elbowed you out of the way. Mike did the same grunt work and went through the same process that we all did. He just did it a lot faster.
Did you have were you ever put in your place by Jim Boeheim as a student?
Oh.
And he gets a bad rap because it's really not that bad. I think he does it mostly in fun because he can. But did you have a spot where maybe you asked a question you regretted in hindsight?
I remember, I think one of these may have been mine, one of these might have been Bill Roth. But first off, Boeheim knew who we all were. He knew who we all thought we were going to be the next Bob Costas, and he wasn't going to take any crap from any of us. So I'll give you the story when I tell you that I learned how to ask questions from Jim Boeheim, because you had to learn how to ask a question to not get slammed. So there's two that I remember. One of them was Bill Roth. One of them may have been me, and it was anytime you questioned a decision. Why didn't you switch to a man defense in the second half when Connecticut was on a 18-2 run? And Jim would crinkle up and he'd go, next question, right? Or he'd go, does anybody have a good question? He would flat out not answer it. So you had to learn how to ask that question. So if you wanted to know why he didn't change defenses in the second half, you better not ask why you didn't change defenses. You better ask, what was your thinking about the way Connecticut was scoring on you and your philosophy about the way you were playing defense? Because if you tried to call him out, he nailed you. So, and then I remember having to get him for the standard pregame interview before a game. Why do we have to do this all the time? That was one that I remember. I'm like, oh, Coach, it's pretty important to have it in the okay, and you get your two questions and that'd be the end of it. So to this day, I feel like I learned how to ask. Some guys like to get stuffed. That's kind of the world we live in a little bit now, because that's a badge of honor sometimes for guys. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be respected, and I wanted to get the information that I thought was worthy of getting, but do it in a way where it would get a good answer. So I always felt like I learned how to ask questions.
Well, and it teaches you, I feel like, when you talked about questioning a decision, who are we to question the decision of a coach? In some respects, you can always say, I've watched enough basketball and I understand the game enough to ask that question, but it creates the ability in you as a broadcaster not to question a decision, but to learn, basically to say, go inside your basketball mind and teach me the game and help me understand as to not why you didn't change defenses, right, but why you felt you had to stay the way you were.
Exactly, and that's it. And I think that's just a better way of getting better information for your listeners or your viewers. I think it's better. You're going to get a better answer. You may not like the answer, but you're going to get a better answer. And I've never dealt with a coach in my 30-year career that didn't want to show you how smart they were.
Fair. And and some of them are probably right, and some of them will make you smarter because of that too at the end of the day.
No
also.
question. And then the coaches want to tell you, because coaches believe they did what they felt like they should do. And if you didn't agree with it, some would say that's fine. Some would say, who the hell are you to question me? But every coach wants to tell you why they did what they did to show people that they're worthy of being in that position. And Boeheim was no different than that. But he knew there were certain people that could ask that question in the media, maybe the people that had been there for 20 years or the professionals. Jim was not going to let one of the WAER punky young kids call him out.
I think I know the answer to this question, and that will lead me to my next one, but just to be sure, I probably should have asked this before we hit record. Who called the national championship basketball game?
Bill Roth and I did, and there's a funny story behind that.
But before I get into it, because I remember, and the reason I thought of it, because I think Bill has talked in the past about he had never been more proud of you in your time as students than in that game, and the way he felt that you had performed in that game. And that, I don't remember the conversation, I don't remember how we got to it, but he said, for me as a sports director, it was really cool to see Paul in that moment. When you look back at it, what was cool about that moment other than you're in college and you're at the Final Four?
Right. All right. So the backstory to this a little bit is there's a group of probably 8 of us that are doing basketball games, and Bill and I are the only seniors. All right. So we kind of knew before the tournament started that if they get to the Final Four, it's us. We're the seniors. That's our reward for being the seniors. The trade-off is the only other game I did during that tournament run was the first round game. So I did the first round game. Don't even remember who it was against. And then I'm done because Tirico, Palillo, a couple of, Callis, those guys do the Sweet 16, the Elite 8 game.
O'Brien, too. I think, did we forget him?
Yeah, Dave O'Brien might have been in that mix as well. We did forget Dave. So we get to the Final Four, and it's Bill and I. And then as per the standard WAER protocol, you flip a coin. Now, this was a bigger coin flip because this wasn't win the coin flip, get to do first half or second half. This was win the coin flip, get first choice of the 2 games. So you can take second half of the semifinal, first half of the final, or go all in and push your chips all into the center of the table and say first half semi, second half final, of which may not ever happen. All right, so I'm like, I win the coin toss, and I think Bill is still pissed off at me. And I don't know that he'll ever admit that, but I think he's still pissed off at me. So I win the coin toss, and I'm like, second half championship game. So I call the first half of Providence. Bill calls the second half. We get to the championship game. So Bill does the first half, and then I get the second half. And obviously, everybody knows kind of what happened. It's one of the great moments of my career. It's kind of weird to say 30 years later. I'd like to think I've had a few others, but I called the national championship game 3 rows behind Bobby Knight on the sidelines at the Superdome in New Orleans on press row. I'm a 21-year-old snotty kid in a bad-fitting blazer, and Bill and I are there, and it was amazing. It was this unbelievable experience, and then the game goes the way that it goes, and I'm proud of myself that I stayed in the moment. I listened back to it, and you always have the hindsight of it was one of the great championship game moments in history. Should I have been more about it? But you're calling Syracuse, and Indiana hits the basket, and I'll never forget, and people that remember the game remember the Syracuse guys stood around for like 3 seconds until somebody called timeout because they were shocked by it. And I remember kind of being on top of it. No one's calling timeout yet, and timeout with 3 seconds, and it was about what we had been taught to be in control of the game. It wasn't screaming. It was I thought the appropriate moment for a potential buzzer-beating shot, and it was a great moment. And years later, I was working in Buffalo, and there was the sports radio station in Buffalo was in the same building as the TV station that I worked at, and I knew the guys really well. One day they called me up about 5 years, maybe 3-4 years later, and it's late April or whatever the anniversary date was, and the radio producer called me and goes, "You got to come down here." I said, okay. I come down. He goes, "You got to listen to this." And at the time, it was a sponsored Jack Buck This Day in Sports. This Day in Sports, April 30th, 1987. And he sets up the Syracuse game, and it's my call. They had gotten my call, that we had sent it to the network. It wasn't Doug Logan's call. It wasn't the Voice of Indiana's call. It was my call. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. That was on like every radio station in the country. I'm like 24 years old, and I'm like, oh my God, like that's the most amazing thing ever. And that's what's cool about our business, is things like that kind of live on in infamy or in as great moments in a program's history. But if you did a good job and you made a good call, then somebody at CBS Network Sports decided it was good enough to put on.
As we put this out, it follows an episode of Mick Mixon from Carolina, and we talked on that one about how he prepared for the moment of calling a Super Bowl. And obviously it didn't end in quite the same illustrious fashion as the game we're talking about, but and that's as a professional who's been doing this for 20 years before he's doing a Super Bowl. what are you thinking as a 21-year-old going into a Final Four in terms of handling the moment, handling the unknown, and being ready to drill an important, decisive moment and call, and just kind of how you went about it and how you felt you were able to handle it in hindsight?
I think the things that we were trained in, that we were all focused on as young broadcasters, was getting the facts right, getting the left, right, XO, pass, run, who made the catch, who made the tackle, who hit the shot, right? That's kind of what we were all at the point in our careers of wanting to be good at. And I learned later on in my career, and I had the pleasure of working for many, many years with Van Miller, who was the voice of the Buffalo Bills and is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, about taking the next level of capturing the moment and the emotion of it. But at the time when you're in college, you just want to get it right. You want to be factual and right. So what I remember about the call in that of the Keith Smart basket was getting the facts right. Immediately, Smart hits the basket, Indiana by 1, and you're looking at the clock because how much time is left, and they're not calling timeout. And okay, they finally call timeout, and there's 3 seconds left, and it's 74-73, and you want to get that right, because you're the people listening to you deserve that you get the facts right. So that's what I remember focusing on, making sure that all of that information was right. And then that's where I think where we all try to go in our broadcasting career was to capture the moment and to capture the emotion. I always think that's the next level. Once you've mastered the X's and the O's and the lefts and the rights and the names and the numbers, the next step is making people feel like they're in that stadium or arena when they're driving down an interstate somewhere.
You almost immediately, that was the end of your career in terms of collegiate radio, because basketball at WAER is the end. You don't do spring sports as a senior.
Well, we did some lacrosse. I think I can't even remember.
But
we did lacrosse back then.
So when I was there, juniors did lacrosse. So basketball at the end of your senior season was it. Like senior, you were done.
I guess it makes a lot of sense, but I don't think that was our rule back then.
All right, well, never mind. So you had a couple more months of being a collegiate radio broadcaster, but then at that point, you pretty much went straight to Buffalo in 1988, correct?
1 year stopover out in New York, working at WWOR, because I wanted to get into TV. That was kind of where I wanted to go.
That was my question, was kind of what path did you want to take? Where did play-by-play factor into that, and how did you kind of wind up with where you did?
I think I knew how hard it was to get play-by-play jobs at the time. There weren't nearly as many. There was so many established people in positions across the country, and I had always kind of gravitated towards the TV side. So my focus was trying to get a TV job, and of course you're sending every resume out to every small market in the country and hoping you get a nibble here and there. And
literal tapes, by the way.
Literal tapes, yes. Shipping 3/4-inch tapes out and using a job search service that you had to call in every day for a recorded voice message of what jobs were available. So in my case, I had stayed in Syracuse that whole summer and worked, because the Syracuse had hosted the Empire State Games and the Junior Olympics. So I worked at WTVH, where I had interned for 4 years. They hired me. I worked the summer. I produced for the guys, and then that kind of ran out, and then the semester was coming, and so I moved back to New Jersey, where I'm from, and was on the brink of starting my career as an air conditioning contract sales person, because my dad owned an air conditioning company. After, my dad gave me 2 weeks of sending tapes out and making calls, and all right, you're not sitting around the house anymore, let's go, you're coming to work. So while I'm still looking, I'm training to literally go cold call air conditioning service contracts in central New Jersey. And then, I was supposed to start doing that on a Monday. On a Thursday, I get a call about a production assistant job at WOR that I get the job. So I spent just shy of a year kind of as a sports producer at WOR, helping them with their sportscast. At the time, they had a new newscast that had a full sportscast, and then a Sunday night sports show, and that was great because that was going to Yankee Stadium, that was going to the Garden, that was going to Giant Stadium. They gave me lots of opportunities to do a lot of stuff behind the scenes with Marv Albert's brothers, Steve and Al, were the sportscasters, and they were great guys. And then that kind of led to still trying to get an on-air TV job and just not necessarily getting the nibbles that I wanted. So a job via the phone dial-in service opens up for a sports producer job in Buffalo. I apply for it, interview for it, get the job, figure I got to get out of my parents' house, I got to get out of New Jersey, need to get on my own. I wasn't on the air, I wanted to be on the air, but I'm like, all right, I'll do this for a year or two, get my resume taped together, see what opportunities will come up, and then what happens there is I start there in 1988. That was the beginning of the Bills' run, 1990 season. They go to the Super Bowl, so I get caught up in all of that, and just having fun doing that, enjoying what I was doing. Got a little opportunity to do some play-by-play stuff at the University at Buffalo. I kind of started there like in 91, filled in a little bit here and there, doing some games. So all of a sudden kind of things start happening for me in Buffalo. Then I get a chance to go on the air part-time, and then that ultimately, about 7 or 8 years after, well, not quite that long, 4 or 5 years after I start, get a chance to be promoted to go full-time on the air in Buffalo, and then by then I'm already doing UB football games, on the weekends. So I had a lot of, met my wife, we got married, so that's when you kind of get to that point where you're like, I got things pretty good here. This was a good place for me to stay, and instead of following the model that a lot of people did, which was 18 months or 2 years in one place, next place, my job kept getting better every 2 years, so I was able to stay in the same place.
You kind of became Mr. Buffalo for a while.
I guess it's a great place, I mean, I wouldn't have been there. I just had literally last month, my 30th anniversary of taking the job in Buffalo, and it's a great sports town, and people accepted me and welcomed me, and I got a lot of opportunities and all these amazing things to go cover Super Bowls and Stanley Cup Finals and NCAA tournaments. So and there's always that tipping point when you're in a market long enough where you become accepted and people like you, and then other opportunities come. That do you give all that up to go to a bigger market where you have to start over again? Sure. And that's a challenge for everybody in this business.
There was a point, though, where the realities of television sports came into being, though, and I think you're 6 years now into some different ventures. What's it like in that situation where you're faced with the reality of what I've known for 25 years is no longer, and then obviously you still have the Buffalo stuff, and you're very successful in other things you've ventured out to afterward, and being able to put together enough things to feel like, all right, I still have a living and I still have a purpose in this market.
Yeah, well, I spoke to a sports journalism class at Canisius College in Buffalo a couple of months ago, and one of those questions the professor asked me, like, well, what would you change if you knew then what you know now about your career? And I said, can I rephrase the question for you? It would have been nice for someone to tell me then that the career that I would get into would change completely about halfway through it, because really that's what's happened to a lot of us. I recognize that,
it's happened to me, and I'm 31.
I went from Buffalo has always been a very traditional market that sort of took you in and loved you when you stayed, and the stations wanted you to stay. They didn't want you to leave. People would leave to go to bigger markets, but a lot of people would turn down bigger markets because the market paid well and you were comfortable and it's an easy place to live, and
Major League City,
cheap, and so. But I sensed about 2010-ish or so that it was changing, that my experience was now a negative. And I think a lot of people have discovered that, particularly in the local TV business, that you were embraced for your desire to stay in your longevity until it got too expensive for longevity. And when the model changed as the 6 and 11 o'clock news went away from being the place of record for people to know what happened to their sports teams on a given day, the model in the business, at least in my experience, was we can do this with younger and cheaper people, and yeah, it was great you covered the Super Bowls, but nobody cares about that anymore. So I made a decision, I think, preemptively to step away after a 25-year career at one station, and decided to get out of the business. I maintained my involvement in it through the University of Buffalo doing football and basketball, through some other side stuff, but made the decision to get out of the business, get into something completely different, maybe to challenge myself a little bit, to see what I could do with it. And I had a fun 5 years of doing that, but I think the sports pulls at you and burns at you, and I was trying to juggle two worlds, and that was kind of hard to do. So about 2 years ago, I made the decision to try to get back in sports, but getting back into it, I knew was not going to be one job at one station. That's not the world we live in anymore. So I had to embrace sort of, okay, if I have 4 part-time jobs that all have me doing different things in sports, and they all add up at the end of the year to where you want to be, and you're busy, and you're doing what you love, then you have to kind of, it's different. It took a while to wrap your head around it, but I don't think I'm much different than a lot of people at my age and experience in the media business. Newspaper guys clearly are going through this. You got to reinvent yourself, and I like to think that there are enough people in Buffalo who respect what I do, sports fans, and that there's a market for what I do. So now you have to create it. You can't sit back and wait for somebody to call, hey, put me on the air, give me my own radio show, give me my own TV show. It's now, I'm going to start a website. I'm going to start a radio show. I'm going to broker my own radio show to a radio station that says, oh, we can put you on the air, and people know who you are, and people will advertise on that. So it's been it's been a challenge. There's been some highs and some lows in it, but ultimately I'm doing what I love doing in a place I love doing it, and you got to make it work. You try to make it work as best you can.
All right, we'll get you back to Paul Peck in just a second. But before we do that, quick shout out to Audible.com. It is the #1 place to go for audiobooks online. Audible.com, or in this case, audibletrial.com/PXPcast. If you go to audibletrial.com/PXPcast, you can sign up to use their service for free for 30 days. And for doing so, they will give you a free audiobook. That one is yours to keep. So you're going to get 2 things free: 30 days of Audible.com and a free audiobook for yours to keep, just for signing up for a trial at audibletrial.com/PXPcast. Listen, sometimes we don't have time to read. Sometimes you want somebody to read to you while you're in the car, or on a run, or on a jog, or whatever else you're doing that you need somebody to read to you for. They have all the best titles. Almost 200,000 of them, including the newest titles. Even The President is Missing. It's the book I'm currently reading by James Patterson. He co-wrote it with the former president, Bill Clinton. It's narrated by Dennis Quaid. So this isn't just like random books narrated by random people. David Spade's book is out. David Spade narrates it. I haven't checked it out, but I'm sure it's awesome. David Spade, a Polaroid guy in a Snapchat world. All of those titles available to you. audibletrial.com/PXPcast. What have you done? What's been the last 2 years for you outside Buffalo?
Yeah, I mean, I have a buddy of mine who's about 20, a little over 20 years in the media in Buffalo, long time involvement with the Buffalo Sabres hockey team on a variety of platforms, television and radio. We've been friends for a long time. He's done Morning Drive in Buffalo before that, and he kind of got pushed out by the Sabres, and we've been friends for a long time. We kind of looked at each other like, how come with our experience nobody really wants to hire us? But we knew the answer to the question. We knew it's the nature of the marketplace as much as anything personal. So we kind of said, well, screw them, let's start it ourselves. So we started a website, and we did that with a core of like 6 or 8 guys who have all been in the media before, that we've worked with, that we know are legitimate guys who know what they're doing, who know how to get stories, who know how to write, and for whatever reason, circumstances push them out. So we started a website called BuffaloSportsPage.com, and I think it's trying to be what doesn't always exist in the sports media marketplace, which is a little bit of perspective. a little bit of, you can go other places for every transaction and every, little piece of roster maneuvering, but if you want to know what it really means, come to our site. We'll tell you what it really means and what its impact will be. So that's kind of the focus that we've taken with that, and then we've tied that into doing our own radio show once a week, and maybe more than that if, working on some things there too, to try to get that word out. Maybe a TV show, these are all things you got to be everywhere these days. So
it's the athletic Buffalo, basically, in the own independent fashion.
Well, yeah, and again, it's starting a business from scratch, and I'd never done that before, and things like insurance and making sure your website has the proper credentials to accept credit cards and all that stuff. Like, this stuff was nuts, but designing the website, making sure you have a deal to get pictures so that the website looks good. I mean, this is all stuff that had to be done, but
they can't just send membership checks. Like, it doesn't.
Well, they certainly can, but
you take cash. Like,
absolutely. And sponsors, you can't exist without sponsors. So luckily, we had the ability to call up people and say, "Hey, we're doing this. Do you want to be a part of it?" And people that knew us and knew our reputation and valued what we've done over 25 and 30 years said, "Yeah, I'm in."
But you've got to write a legal contract.
Yes, you do. Absolutely.
It's not just like, all right, we'll do it for $1,000. Just send us the check.
Absolutely. No. So, so now you're spending as much time on maintaining the website, taking care of the assignments, and making sure the sponsors are happy than you are writing stories. And that's a different challenge, but that's the world that we live in now. And we're not the only ones that have gone sort of an independent route, and now it means you better be doing podcasts, which we are, and you better be on the radio if you can, and you better be hitting your social media pages up. So it's, again, it's so different from the world of when I started in television. There was a 6 and 11 o'clock newscast, and that was it. And if you didn't watch the hockey game that night, you better be in front of your TV at 11 o'clock so I could tell you how the Sabres did that night. We clearly don't live in that world anymore.
It was easier when we did, though, wasn't it?
It was easier, I'll give you that. And now your voice is cluttered among a lot of voices. Some of them professional, some of them not. Some people that prefer the non-professional, some people that prefer the professional. I like to think there's still a place for guys who have made this our career, have trained at it, do it the right ways, but we also know that sometimes the guy who screams the loudest gets the most attention.
How does it work for you to, from a business standpoint, at a place like UB, where obviously you're the radio guy for football, but your presence for them is so much more than that? In terms of, like, do you go to them and say, like, all right, well, for this, I'll do that? Because I'm sure there's a certain extent where they're like, well, you're a football voice in our face, so like you'll just do this because it's part of the gig, right? And that's where I feel like the young gun, like if I thought of myself 5 or 6 years ago, I'd probably like, yeah, sure, I'll just show up, I'll do whatever you want. But even now, like as I'm starting to get older, it's like, well, yeah, for a cost. How do you price that out kind of as an independent contractor to make sure that you are getting value for what you are?
University of Buffalo's always treated me great, always treated me well. There's never been an issue with any of that. Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that I do just because I like to do it, because I want to be there, because I'll do it. No big deal. It's kind of my role a little bit. But when you get to the point where I'm at in my life, where I'm sort of running my own business, you do have to think about stuff like that. And I'll give you an example. I've always been as generous with my time as I could be. Hey, can you come host our golf tournament? Can you MC our golf tournament? And when you're working at a local TV station, you do that for free because it helps build your brand. Right? When you're in the position that I'm in now, you can't do those for free anymore. And some people bristle at that a little bit. Other people are like, yeah, okay, we get it. And I'll say to them, hey, I can do this for you, but I have a fee for this because this is my profession. And I guarantee you that your sponsors will get mentioned and we'll get people in and out, and it'll be professional and it'll be fun, and that's what you're going to pay for. And some people do it and some people don't, and that's okay. But you do have to start thinking differently. Because in the past, yeah, sure, if I'm free and available, yeah, I'll do that, absolutely. Yeah, I can come over, yeah, no problem. Because it helped build your brand. you have to think a little differently about that sometimes. But like I said, on the university level, they're great with me, and I get compensated for almost everything I do there. Coaches show, radio show, basketball, football, and that's all you could ask.
Let's talk about play-by-play a little bit, and that part of what you do, and getting to, I don't know, is it for you? Is it almost even now it's a little bit different, but when you had the TV job and it was kind of the I don't want to say this negatively, but like the thing you did on weekends, was it like the fun release for you to be able to, like my day job is the TV sports guy, but on weekends I get to call play-by-play? Totally,
absolutely, couldn't have said it better. And that's what I love about particularly radio play-by-play, because pictures tell the story. And when you do local TV sports, you're in that 2.5 to 3 minute window of this is what you get. And you get to do 3 highlights, and you better make them the 3 best highlights. And if there's 10 highlights, you better pick the 3 of the best 10. So it's an incredible relief to be able to have time like that. And I think as I've gone through my career, I've discovered that I enjoy play-by-play the most for a lot of those reasons. And that's why I've gravitated into doing more of it at this point in my career. And let's be honest, it's the one part of the sports media that hasn't changed in the 30 years. That is still, they haven't come up with a robot that can look down on a field and call a game. I'm sure somebody's working on it. But it's in the world that we live in that has changed so much in the way people get their sports news, it's still, okay, fill the next 3 hours. We're not going to tell you what's going to happen, and there is no script. That's what tests all of us as play-by-play guys, which is, I enjoy that test. And particularly on radio. Doing TV play-by-play is you're an assister on the video picture. In radio, it's all you. It's the word picture. So I like that challenge. I enjoy that. And you're right. It was always kind of a fun release for me and something I really enjoyed. And now I enjoy that even more, because now I can focus a little more on it and really put a little more effort into it, because I'm not juggling it with a whole bunch of other things.
What makes good play-by-play of football on the radio?
Well, I think what I talked about before, you got to get the X's and O's right. You got to get the run, pass, name, number, tackle. You got to get that right. But it's how descriptive can you be? There's a run and the pass. There's about 20 ways you can describe a run. Does he dart through the hole? Does he power through the hole? Does he squirt through the hole? Does he slither? That's one I came up with last year, because University of Buffalo has a 5'7" running back, and he's really shifty, and he slithers through holes. So when I use a word like that, or when any great play-by-play guy, you know what that means. It's not just a run to the left. Is it off tackle? Is it behind the guard? Is it up the middle?
And making sure that the word means that you're using the word the right way, too. Because I feel like, particularly, I remember back when I was in school, it would be like, well, you need more words. It's like, so you make a list. It's like words for throw, zings, zips, whips, and then you would just say whips. But did he really whip it, or did you just say it because it was different than pass? Well, and that's where I feel like is almost the bigger chore. It's not just knowing the words, but using them the right spots.
You're right, and the challenge in doing good play-by-play is figuring out the way to say that in the least amount of words, because you don't have 8 words to say it. You got 1 or 2 to try to describe it. So does he lob the pass? Does he fire the pass? Does he zing it? Does he flip it? And then how are you describing it on the field, outside the numbers, up the hash marks? I mean, all of that stuff, it's not just a run to the right for a gain of 12. There's so much more you can do with that, and I think that's what we all push ourselves, and I do this to this day when I listen back to the games. Boy, I could have done a better job of being more descriptive. I want somebody who has a knowledge of football that can close their eyes when they're listening to the radio, picture what happened based on what I described them. And now we live in the world where the wonderful places we work for take our calls and match them up to the video highlights for the website shortly after the game, where there is no hiding anymore. I was taught by a lot of guys who did this back in the 60s and 70s. Well, yeah, you can fudge it a little bit. It's radio. Nobody will ever know. Not anymore. You know, so I think the ultimate test is to go back and watch your calls matched up with the video going, did I do that right? Did I do a good job? Did I be as descriptive on that, you know, as possible, you know? And it just you develop it over time. And then the third level of all this is what we talked about before, is capturing the moment, the emotion. You know, the quarterback wipes the sweat from his hands, grabs at his towel. You know, the fans are in anticipation on the edge of their seat. One of the great examples, and I don't know whether it's out there or not. Like I said, I worked with a guy in Van Miller who was awesome at that. And there's a classic Van Miller clip of like an early 80s Bills game when they were about to come up with a huge win, a big upset win. It might have even been to clinch a division title. And it all relied on a field goal. And there were like 2 or 3 timeouts in a row called. So he's going for like 3 or 4, almost 4 minutes of trying to build up the emotion of what's going on in the stadium, and they keep calling timeout, and it's brilliant because he did it so well. But you knew exactly what that it was like. You know, the people are like, this is the kick to decide what's going to happen. That's what a good play-by-play guy, that's what the goal for everybody should be, is can you make that person at home slide to the edge of their seat just like the people in the stands are.
And then the kick was wide, right?
No.
Or was that too soon?
No, that was too soon. Yes, it's always too soon. The kick was good, but the call was amazing. Not so much for the call of the winning field goal, but for the 3 minutes leading up to it.
How has the game changed from a play-by-play standpoint with the no-huddle, the hurry-up, and the speed of offenses, and the way that you operate over the last 10, 15 years?
Well, the one rule that gets thrown out is when you break in a new color guy and you're trying to sort of tell them the dynamics of it. The old rule used to be when they shut up when they break the huddle. That gives me enough time to set up the down, the distance, double receivers left, single setback or whatever. Well, there's no huddles to break anymore.
He just kept talking the whole game, and then Paul, they never huddled.
There's no huddles to break anymore, so you have to. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a more of a challenge for the color guys who now get like 15 seconds to make their point instead of the 25 or 30 they used to. So that's a bit of a challenge. The game moves so fast. The run, the read option, I think, is a challenge for all of us as play-by-play guys, because these guys have gotten so good at being deceptive that they don't just fool the defense, they fool us up in the press box.
Hand off to Gilbert. No, it's a keep.
Yeah, and I've called like 4 or 5 Army games in my career, and they're unbelievably good at it.
It's like 3-card money.
What you have to do as a play-by-play guy is put yourself on a 2-second delay. And that's really hard to do, because we all want to be like, you want to beat the crowd on calling it a catch before they cheer it. But when you're doing an option team, and every team is an option team to some degree now, you almost have to take a step back and wait to be sure you know who has the football before you call it.
It's almost like you have to put the right filler words in, because if you say snap, option right, you bought yourself 2 seconds there while you can figure out what's happening, and it's just being economical and effective, kind of with your delay techniques.
It's a trick to make sure you've figured out who has the ball, and even you get caught on it sometimes now because the guys are so good, and your eyes are always trained to sort of watch the action, and if it's a really good fake, there's defenders tackling a guy who doesn't have the ball while the quarterback is looping around the other side, right? It's hard. It's tough. It's a challenge. Stadium locations are the other challenge, I think, for most of us as play-by-play guys now. I mean, there are NFL play-by-play booths that are literally in the end zone. Some of them, like in Washington, which is by far the single worst place ever, where you're literally behind the end zone. You know how hard it is? You know that. How is to call a game from behind? Like, Heinz Field in Pittsburgh is like that. You're literally behind. You're calling the game from an end zone angle. It's impossible.
So, good story on that. My first year at Ball State, we were playing in the St. Petersburg Bowl, which is at Tropicana Field in Tampa, and you're obviously in the baseball press box, so the field is going straight away from you. And I will never forget the call, and I maybe I'll go back and find it. But Kevon Mabon was a wide receiver, caught a bubble screen, and I thought it was like a 15-yard gain. And he caught it so far back the line of scrimmage, but I couldn't tell. So he's picking up yardage. Kevon, he's got 5, he's got 10, first down Cardinals. And before the next play, I went, Wenning at the line of scrimmage, it's 2nd and 13. He lost 3 yards. It was unbelievable. I had no idea where the ball was.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a hard, either you're in a terrible spot inside the 20-yard line, or some places you're like 20 stories high, which is actually better than being behind it. But sometimes you're so high that you particularly when you get to be my age, when your eyesight isn't quite as good as it used to be, you're so darn high, sometimes you can't even see the numbers. And then the crazy uniforms.
Looking at you, Akron.
That the guys wear now, where the numbers are, there used to be all the numbers had to be like a standard height, bold and all that stuff. Well, now, like one year the Saints wore white road jerseys with gold numbers. What are you kidding me?
Akron has the white jerseys with the silver numbers.
Right. Yeah.
And they're in italics.
Yeah. We were just talking about this the night we recorded this. We were talking about Eastern Michigan. My first game I did on the gray field, they rolled out in gray helmets, gray jerseys, and gray pants. I'm like, what, are you kidding me?
And white numbers, probably.
And white numbers. Like, what, are you kidding me? So that's part of the challenge as a play-by-play guy, too. You can be ready to go and walk into the stadium, and they roll out in uniforms you never saw them in before with, like, stylized, crinkled-up numbers. Like, what, are you kidding me?
Central Michigan, their throwbacks have no numbers on the front. That was a good one. I forgot about that a couple years ago.
Yeah,
that was. Yeah.
It's so now you're looking like, and then this is a challenge for me. Like, you get a lot of, and thankfully guys don't wear them as much anymore. But you get like a bunch of receivers that all wear 80s numbers. One's 83, one's 88, one's 85. You can't tell. The numbers get crumpled. So now you're looking for, one guy has low socks, one guy has high socks, one guy has arm pads, one guy doesn't. Like, those are the things you learn over the years. You're like, I'm not going to be able to rely on seeing the guy's number, but I'm going to know if it's the guy with the low socks, then it's Joe Smith. He's number 83.
Well, Paul, we're approaching football season here. We're at Media Day as we record this, or the night before Media Day, so we're getting to that time. If people want to follow you and the Buffalo Bulls, where do they track down your calls, or you on social media? Or I know you do your game week kind of Paul's prep nuggets
my
column.
Bull session, right? My aptly titled Bull session. UBBulls.com is the school website. A lot of the stuff is on there, a lot of the video, a lot of the calls, part of the coaches' shows and all that stuff. My Twitter feed is @PeckOnSports. I try to get as much stuff out there as I can there. And then, as I mentioned, we do a lot of stuff on the website, which is BuffaloSportsPage.com. So if you're a Bills fan, Sabres fan, UB fan, going to be a lot of new people that are going to see what Buffalo is doing this year with some really talented players, and might be one of the nice surprise stories in college football this year. At least a lot of us are hoping. I think they're going to get some eyebrows, and anybody that remembers the 7 overtime game last year is one of the most amazing. By the way, not to add, let me, because we're going really long here.
No, but that's good. Let me go back.
7 overtime game was one of the most amazing things I've ever been a part of, because there's no timeouts in overtime. So we were on the air for an hour and 5 minutes straight without a break. Well, there's no timeouts. 7 overtime game. So I ran out of water. I usually have like 3 bottles of water or whatever. You grab an extra bottle, water, done, gone. iPad that has the stats on it, died. Like, the game was 5.5 hours long. Like, stuff that never happens, happened. And it was the most amazing, incredible experience that I've ever been a part of, and what it taught me was you better be prepared for everything. You think anybody walked into that stadium that day, including me or Doug Sherman, another Syracuse guy who did the game on ESPN, think we were ready for a 7 overtime game? But you better be ready for it, because you never know what's going to happen. You better be prepared, and you better rise to the occasion of the game, which, as weird as it sounds, in a game that Buffalo lost, will go down as one of the great games in school history.
In college football history. How much are you scrambling as that game is going? Wolfie, Brian Wolf, your SID at Buffalo, I need to know, what's the NCAA record for most passing yards? What's the NCAA record for touchdowns? What's the longest game ever? How much of that are you doing, and how much of a multitasker are you? Particularly if you don't have breaks, there's no time for you to stop and collect those thoughts.
I've got a great crew, and they were all on it. One of our pregame and postgame and halftime host the minute it got to the 7th overtime, he knew and hopped on and said, this is now tied for the longest game in NCAA history. My spotter, when we knew that the quarterback was over 500 yards passing, he's already grabbing the school record book and pointing to me where it stands on the record book. So it's too hard for me to do it, particularly when there are no breaks. You can scribble a note or whatever, or sometimes you're at that point where you're like, geez, I wonder how close he is to the school record in passing yards, which is a subtle coded hint, like somebody look that up for me, because I don't have time to look it up myself.
Or you just outright say it, like, Brian, if you're listening, can you please look this up for us? Yeah.
So, but when you have a good relationship with your athletic communications people and the crew that you're on, they're on the same wavelength as you, they already know. It's not a matter of knowing what you want, it's knowing this is important, we need to get this out there. So and that's what's easier about our jobs today is the stat monitors are great. You can look the stuff up immediately, it updates after every play. 2 clicks and you can find all this stuff. So I'm lucky to have an awesome group of guys to work with that beat me to the punch, because again, when you're in a game like that, you're just trying to, okay, what's next? All right, if they get a 2-point conversion here, they win. If they don't, we're going to another overtime. And, particularly in a non-traditional college football market like Buffalo, I felt like my job was to continue to explain to people what all of it meant. Okay, we're into the 3rd overtime, which means no more extra points. Now they have to go for 2. So it was a constant reinforcing, okay, if Buffalo scores here, we're tied. If they don't, they lose. If they do, they win. And it was kind of keeping up on all that kind of stuff.
Did you know it was Donnie Ernsberger's sister when she ran on the field?
I did not. I think, you're kind of looking down to get yourself, and you look up and you go, well, what's going on over there? And you just saw a fan in a jersey, and I think one of the guys noticed the TV feed, and I think maybe our color guy sort of mentioned it, like, that person has an Ernsberger jersey on. We didn't know it was her sister.
You didn't have a Kevin Harlan. She's obviously drunk. She's at the 30. She's at the 40.
So, I mean, there's so, what it's like. There's so much going on. You're just trying to stay in control of what's happening on the field. You're not worried about what the social media moment is going to be. You worry about that later.
Well, Paul, good night. It's late. Thanks for doing this, man.
Always a pleasure. It's good to talk Syracuse. It's good to talk play-by-play. I have a passion for it. I love it, like a lot of us love it. And we're students of it, and we're trying to get better and trying to make everybody else better. And we challenge ourselves 12 times a year, if not more than that. And that's what's fun about this.
Here's to 14. I'll see you back here in Detroit.
You got it.
That is Paul Peck joining us here on Play-by-Playcast. Many thanks to him for sitting down and doing that. As we recorded it, it was like midnight. I think by the time we finished talking there, it was like 1:30 in the morning when everything was all said and done. That was recorded at Football Media Day for the Mid-American Conference the night before. So we're sitting in the hotel in Detroit, Michigan, and you could obviously tell and you could hear the surrounding noise and such. But that was after the commissioner's reception. So they do a little kind of cocktail party or so for all the people in administration from all the schools and the football coaches, etc. And that got finished, I don't know, we walked out of there maybe 10:30, 11, and then we sat down and knocked out the podcast. For this pod, that is a record for latest recording of an episode, I want to say, for sure, in podcast history. So thanks to Paul Peck for staying awake with us and knocking that one out this week. Until next week, we say so long. Tim Haggerty will be our guest. He's the voice of the El Paso Chihuahuas. They're the AAA affiliate of the San Diego Padres. Tim Haggerty is our guest next week. Until then, see ya.